here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week, it's going to be the turn of the singer, keyboard player, songwriter, and also author Roddy, who was in Faith No More and also Imperial Teen, and has just recently written his memoir, which is titled The Royal We, which has just come out on Jawbone Books. Available from all good bookshops and also online. So this is the interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Roddy, it's over to you.
1 year older. It's funny also, though, we're in different countries. So, like, I think you were more privy to sort of like stumbling onto like that scene, like Roxy Music or, David Bowie or Slade. For me, it was like California, like, and my older sister was like, we kind of had more of a lazy perspective in terms of music. Like, my sister listened to like Cat Stevens and Jackson Brown and Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. But she was adventurous, and kind of early on, she had a David Bowie record, and that really caught my eye. It was like, oh my God, caught my ear. I was like, I couldn't believe what I heard. So that was like that was an early one. And then around that same time, Sparks. I mean,
Right.
that's a California band. They feel like they're very European, and it feels like a sophisticated, elevated kind of presentation of music and weird concept, but they are California. Sparks are from California, and they really had a big influence on me as a kid. And then like other American stuff like Devo, like when we first started getting into like, new wave stuff like Devo, B-52s. I guess kind of new wave stuff really kind of
Yes. Did you ever get
tickled
into
me.
things like heavy metal? Was that sort of coming? Because you obviously got the West Coast
No.
Laurel Canyon vibe that was kind of hanging out there with your sister. But I just wondered if the kind of the heavier bands like Deep Purple or Black Sabbath appeared, or Led Zeppelin.
I don't think so. It's funny, because then I joined Faith No More later, and Faith No More got penned eventually as such a heavy band, and I think we did get kind of lumped into like a metal sort of scenario. But people were always just like, I would have conversations with fans or people, on the road or people that we would come in contact with, and they just always assumed like I was that kind of a person. But no, I'd be like, no, I'm gay. I grew up with three sisters. Like heavy metal is like the farthest thing from where I would like travel.
Yes.
I've never even heard Black Sabbath. I don't even know what they sound like. Isn't that funny? But I did like, earlier rock stuff, like Led Zeppelin, I think had a real place in my home for some reason, but definitely not heavy metal, not Judas Priest or like, yeah. Nothing along those lines. Only later, like I started to pay attention to it because I kind of thought it was funny and campy, but no, they didn't have a
Were you the
place in my
youngest of
musical
four then?
sensibility.
Were you the youngest of four?
There was one younger than me, three sisters I had. One sister was younger and two were older.
Right, so you were there, right, stuck in the middle. And were your parents, did they give you much kind of direction culturally, musically, or sort of inspirationally?
It's funny, not so much. I was talking about this the other day with my boyfriend. I would have thought they would have been more invested in music stuff, but the only things I remember, like they bought Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We had that record, which was a whopper. That was a big deal for me. That kind of opened the doors to this magical realm of like kind of, just like colorful and weird and like my sister tuned me onto like the fact like, oh, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, you know what that means, right? And there was like a drug reference, and I was like, oh my God, that was everything. But my parents, they that song and then or that record and then Bridge Over Troubled Water also they had Simon and Garfunkel,
Right,
which
yes.
I kind of glommed onto also. But they weren't really my mom was a piano player and she was that for me more than anything, like in a musical way. She and I like had that bond growing up. She encouraged me and she's like was really a great piano player. Like into her later days she always played piano, so we had that, but not in terms of popular music. She
Yes,
didn't really
because my
contribute
brother
a lot.
was, I had a brother who was 7 years older, and he was very into prog rock. He was that period of the 70s
Mhm.
where it was Genesis, yes, Wishbone Ash, Barclay James Harvest. But he did have He did have a Goodbye Yellow Brick Road in there, and he did also have Sergeant Pepper,
No,
which, and I was obsessed as well because at the time, and this was being the sort of the mid 70s at the earliest, and yeah, sort of probably 73, 74 when he got that album. So the Beatles, I mean, it was kind of weird. They'd only just broken up, but it felt like a band from a completely different period, didn't they? They felt like quite old and
yeah.
established, but yeah, you just thought, God, that was only 3 years. And but I was obsessed with that record, and there was a track on it on side two, Good Morning, which I just thought was just like
Oh, yeah,
it
yeah.
was such a kind of it had such a story and this kind of yeah, and then that day in the life and that whole sort of drama. But then there was also all the playful stuff about Mr. Kite and his men, his circus, and it was just every song was just it was so dense, wasn't it?
It's a good point to make those. There were stories, like, and as young people, like stumbling onto that, even the artwork too, everything felt like a story. Like, what did that mean? Like those costumes and all of those people, and like Marilyn Monroe and like all of these celebrities, but them and their parade outfits. Like, what did it all mean? There were stories constantly. That's what I was kind of drawn to, I think. And the songs, yeah, like you said, they're very story-like.
Yes, lovely Rita, Meter Maid. I mean, they were just. I've just
Yeah.
started watching the Paul McCartney film, Man on the Run, which he also had that album, Band on the Run, as well, alongside
Is
Peter
it a
Frampton.
documentary?
Yes, I've just sort of signed up to
Uh,
Netflix for a month to sort of get through all my latest music documentaries that have just been sort of sitting there. And I thought, yes, I can sort of binge on all that at the moment. Have you seen it?
yeah.
Is it good?
No,
No,
I haven't seen it.
you haven't
I haven't
seen it.
seen it.
No,
Mm-mm.
it's got to be done. So, were you then a piano player in your younger days, in your formative teen period? Was classical piano your thing?
Classical was. I started just like fooling around on the piano as a young boy, and yeah, my mother just kind of steered me into that. I think she steered everyone in our family into it, but I was the only one that it stuck with. The
Yes.
sisters wouldn't have it. They weren't involved. They weren't invested. They had no interest in it. But that's what I always tell people when they say, like, how did you stick with it and make it something that was in your life? Always say, like, I think, like, just based on the ratio of me and my sisters, it feels like 1 in 4. We'll maybe explore that and stick with it.
Yes. Did you
I
enjoy
was I
did
was
you
the one,
enjoy
yeah.
doing classical piano? Was that
Yeah, I
something?
loved it. It really wasn't something like personally that I would have imagined that I would have gotten into, but I really was diligent with it. Like as a young person, I would get up like really early in the morning before school and I would practice for an hour and do my sort of scales and churning and classical stuff. And then I'd come home from school and I'd do an hour after school.
Yes.
And then
I
just
mean,
knowing kids these days, it doesn't seem like it's odd to me that I was that sort of involved and diligent about it.
well, we had a lot more boredom in our younger days. There wasn't so many gadgets and sort of attention span. You had to, for me, your parents would just go, well, you'll have to just go and play and make something up. We haven't got time to, so you just go and do things with your friends or on your own.
Yeah.
It was a little, we did have more boredom and we only had like two or three channels on the TV. There wasn't even, and we didn't have videos. You just had to watch a few cartoons. That was the end of cartoons. The telly would often be blank in the afternoon, because there was just nothing
Yeah, that's
on.
a good point. We weren't even allowed television, honestly. Like, I mean, we would get like our refuge was for sure books. We would read a lot, and that took up a lot of space. I remember days like that, like going home, like after school, just like couldn't wait to get to my bedroom just so I could just like lie down and read that book. That
Yes.
was such a fun world. But you're right, there were no gadgets. There certainly weren't any screens to watch.
Yes, we had more than 20 seconds of attention span. So during that period then, because in the book you talk a lot about your sexuality at this time, don't you? And sort of older men. Is this when was it in your that teen period that everything started to blossom for you at this point?
I think so for sure. Like puberty was when it all kicked off. Once I started sort of knew what I liked and sort of would gravitate towards that, and then I would recognize it. I lived in a big city, living in Los Angeles, and I would see like gay like capsules here and there, like coming home. Like we lived in Hollywood, and we'd be driving home, and I talk about it in the book, and I'd see like, what's that? It was like a Sunday sort of like beer bust with like gay men and leather. And I was like, what is that? Like, and just knew in my little gay mind that that was something that I wanted. But it was at that age where, yeah, I started to go and seek it out. Like, literally, I saw that happening on a street near my house driving home. And I was like, oh my God, I just couldn't wait to get back there. I had to get on my bike and go back there and like figure it out. I wanted in.
Yes.
And then it sort of led to like, I don't know how, I guess I figured it out just kind of accidentally cruising spots. In Los Angeles, there were a lot of them at the time. But like up in Griffith Park, what I was telling you about before we started recording, Griffith Park is a park here in Los Angeles. I'm in Los Angeles right now, but where like hills and guys would go and cruise, and it was all outdoors like in these trails, and have sex in the bushes. And I think like I started going up into that park with my friends, and we'd go up and like smoke pot or ride our bikes in the hills. It was kind of like it was a ways from where I grew up, but we would do it. We would ride up there right into the hills, and it was just like something that was fun that we did. And I remember being up there with my friends and seeing guys coming in and out of the bushes. And I was like, what is, and before I could even form the question, I knew the answer. I was like,
Right.
oh, that's what's going on there. So, like I would notice these things, figure them out on my own, and go back to them on my own. It was a very lonely sort of environment, but like at the same time, like empowering, because I was able to figure it out and get what I wanted.
Yes. Well, at that age, I was just anything to do with sex was sort of something that was passing me by quite a lot, really. I mean, it was only until later on that one managed to sort of find anybody to yes, be with. But but your at your age, you were there. Happy times. It was no problem. You weren't just fantasizing about it. You were just doing it.
I was making it work for myself, David.
Because a few years ago, I did quite a few interviews with members of the Coquettes. Were they from San Fran? No, but they were San Francisco. They weren't from LA,
They were
were they?
San Francisco, yeah. I
Right.
know one of them still now. Like one guy, do you know this artist Augusto Mercado? Does that name
Gus-
ring a bell?
Augusta? No,
He's
not
that
really.
kind of he's in the Whitney Biennial this year, but he's a friend of mine. He's an older man, and he grew up, I think he grew up in San Francisco, but he was one of the Coquettes.
Yes, because there was
But
people
that
like
was, yeah, that was all San Francisco. That was a little bit
yes,
far
and I've
from
done
me.
a few interviews with Christian Hoffman. He was in the Muppets, wasn't he?
Oh, nice. I know Christian.
Yes, what a star. So was Lance Loud, was he on your radar at that age?
Not really. That show was on television, but like I was saying earlier, we didn't really um, watch a lot of TV when we were kids. We weren't allowed to. But that show that he was on, for the listeners who don't know who Lance Loud is, he was a young person in kind of the very first sort of reality TV presentation. It was called An American Life. Is that what it's called?
I think so, yes.
But it's about like a or an American Family, I think is what it was called. It was about a family in Santa Barbara, and it was just like a mundane sort of like pedestrian family. And the exercise was a filmmaker going in and recording everything within the family. There was a daughter and a son and a mom and a dad, and it kind of flipped when the boy Lance, the kid in the family, came out as gay. He was really young, and the family dealing with that, and us watching it as Americans, presentationally watching that show and seeing how the family dealt with a gay boy was just kind of like turned everything around. And he became, really famous as a result. I think like Andy Warhol reached out, and he was like, he became sort of a celebrity unto himself just due to the fact that he was one of the first sort of like queer sort of pioneers that like had to declare himself gay in public.
Yes,
But
well,
I didn't know him at the time, and I didn't know the show at the time. But then later on, I knew who he was, and I knew he was in a band with Christian, I think,
the
Christian
Mumps.
Hoffman.
Classic.
Or they were, yeah. Was he in the Mumps?
Yes, he was the
Lance
singer.
Loud?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, yeah. So
So
I kind of knew who he was through Christian. Christian was friends with my sister. And then at one point when I was sort of on tour, Lance was a writer and he reached out and asked if he could interview me for Out Magazine. And I'd never discussed my being gay in the public. So that was kind of my first sort of foray into that was through
yes.
Lance Loud.
God, that's amazing. Well, that's perfect, isn't it? Really, there you go. Did just flipping back to the music when, yeah, as we were trundling through the 70s, I was a little bit young for it, but you were in LA, which was probably better. I was in the countryside in East Anglia, which was quite a culturally barren place. Did punk sort of creep into your consciousness as we got into the late 70s or even earlier, the mid 70s? Was
It
that
for
sort of
sure did. Yeah, punk rock came into Los Angeles in a big way. Like New York, I think was maybe first. Like the Ramones happened, and even like New York Dolls were happening, but like I think Los Angeles, yeah, started to come around in terms of like there was a band called the Germs and a band called X and
right?
the
Yes.
Go-Go's at their really early stage. They were very punk rock. Um, but when I was, yeah, I think I was probably like 16 or 17, I kind of caught wind of that and started going to shows in that realm in Los Angeles. It was a really exciting time.
So you embraced the post-punk period with great enthusiasm.
I did for sure. Punk rock in Los Angeles like was a different sort of sound. It's like Los Angeles, the differences between like Los Angeles and San Francisco is really stark. Like Los Angeles is very squeaky clean and kind of like summery. And people move to Los Angeles to become actors and actresses. So there's like a sense of cheesiness to it. There's
Mm.
the entertainment industry. There's people who are tan and like white teeth and like really pretty blonde hair. It was that sort of vibe. It was very kind of cheese ball a little bit. And even the music that came out in that way, like I was saying, like the Go-Go's were like one of the first punk rock bands in Los Angeles. And you can imagine, like if you listen to the Go-Go's and it's so bubblegum, it's like really like naive and kind of innocent. It doesn't have the darkness that say, a band from like New York or later when I moved to San Francisco, like that was the big contrast. Like the bands there, like the post punk rock scene in San Francisco was a lot darker. Los
Yes.
Angeles was a little bit squeaky clean. I still liked it, and I sort of, that's what I did at that age. But then when I moved to San Francisco, I was like, oh, it was way different. Just everything
Yes.
was so different in San Francisco. The mood was different. The vibes were different. People were all of a sudden like political suddenly. People were doing like crystal meth as opposed to like, I don't know what people did in Los Angeles, but it was a much darker place, and
Right.
it
Yes.
felt more appropriate to jump into that music scene,
Yeah.
the darkness of
Joy
that.
Division couldn't have come from LA, from Hollywood, really, could they? It was too
Right,
sunny.
exactly. Yeah, too
You would
sunny.
Ian Curtis would just, the lyrics would all be confused, wouldn't it? And same with the
No
Smiths
one
and
will get it.
Morrissey, they wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
I suddenly got the Eagles when we were doing a road trip going around sort of, some of those national parks on a very bright sunny day, blue skies, amazing landscapes, and you think, I really get the Eagles now. But it's hard, when it's a miserable, rainy, drizzly day, which a cold northerly wind in the UK. It's like, I mean, you can still enjoy the Eagles, but it's a little bit different. You kind of realise it's a lot more blissful, isn't it? Optimistic. You can see the sun. You can get vitamin D in your veins. It's all
It
there.
is different, but then it's interesting also, David, is like, I mean, on the surface, it is that. Like it's so like upbeat and like sunshine and happy, but there's a darkness to LA also that's very, I mean, if you put like the Manson family into that realm. It's
Yes.
sort of like that sums it up. Like amongst that, amongst the sort of dippy hippies and like sort of like the oblivious sort of like good looks and tans and prettiness, there's kind of a darkness, and like there's a lot of heroin and a lot of like, really subversive thought. And, in a nutshell, yeah, the Manson family. And
Yes.
it's almost more sort of like kind of like disturbing because it's coming from that bright, sunny place, and you don't expect it. Like even coming back now, like I'm in Los Angeles right now and I forget, and we'll like situations will present themselves and then they'll kind of turn. It's like, oh, it seems like it's so innocent and cheerful. And then it's like, oh, it's kind of dark and fucked up.
Yes, it's all a bit like a David Lynch film, isn't it, really? Underneath
Kind of, yeah.
the
It flips. The script of it flips really quickly. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's not what it seems. Catches you
yes.
by surprise.
So then, sort of, as you get to 16, do you leave school? Because at our age, you could leave school, you go to A levels. What happens when you get to that ripe old age, 16, 17? And it's also the 1980 at this point where we get a new decade. We had Thatcher, you had Reagan. Suddenly things started to sort of change from dear old Jimmy Carter to Ronald with his big promises and big dreams, really.
Absolutely. It turned into that like at the age of 17, like I graduated from high school and then I just moved to San Francisco. And then everything did change. And the Reagan sort of administration was part of that. Absolutely. Because suddenly kids were political in a way that they hadn't been before. And that changed everything. And also just being in San Francisco changed everything.
Yes. When did you sort of step up from sort of the classical piano to sort of wanting to be in a rock band? Was that a definite moment?
I think it was when I started doing drugs, honestly. I could sort of see that window when I started doing drugs. I was like, oh, yeah, music isn't just this. Music is this. I mean, I was aware of the fact that, like, music and rock, but it never seemed to me, it always felt like the more obvious take was like an electric guitar or a drums. It never dawned on me, like, oh, keyboards can find their place in here, into this world. And when I moved to San Francisco and just moved in with a bunch of people, a bunch of artists, and we were all living together, it became an option that I hadn't realized was there. Like playing an electric keyboard and plugging it in and getting loud and making noise all of a sudden was an option that I hadn't seen before.
Yes, because I know John Peel, who was our, go-to DJ in the UK. He often had an issue with his bands with a keyboard player. He didn't trust
Did
them.
he?
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I'm
he
the same way. I felt that myself. I was like, no, that doesn't really
I
work.
think it brought
Um,
memories of Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Rick Wakeman and Yes, and it was a
yeah,
little
yeah, yeah,
people.
yeah.
You could start with quite good intentions and ended up as sort of prog rock, really, can't you? Quite easily and sort of
Yeah, like your brother's vibe.
yes, my brother's vibe. So yes, the keyboard. How did the with the beginning of the band? Because you say in the book, chapter 9, you sort of play your first gig at this famous place. Mabue Gardens in North Beach,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I think the first show I played was a place called The Sound of Music. Isn't that a great club name?
That is quite lovely, actually.
It was
Um,
such a dive and crazy, just like sex workers and drug addicts. But yeah, we started just playing like clubs. I somehow just got started playing with my friends and we just started that band and started from there, just playing different shows and exploring.
yes, because in the book you mentioned some of our bands like Crass, don't you? At this stage, the graphic was there a band called The Trial that you mentioned in the book, and who made flyers and
Yeah.
fanzines loosely based on Crass. So was that kind of English anarcho punk anarchist scene sort of slipping into your sort of consciousness and life as well?
I think so. Like I was saying, like politics suddenly came up. And that was something that America doesn't really do as prevalently, I think, as the UK does. And when I moved to San Francisco, like obviously there's that history of hippies who are political, that comes from a political movement, bucking against the system. And I think a lot of like the hippies' kids who had grown up, who were my age, and who had grown up in that environment were turning to music, but maybe doing something differently. They were making punk rock. And kids that I knew, that band that you mentioned, Trial, and a couple other bands, like this would have never happened in Los Angeles. Also, they kind of regarded themselves as peace punks.
Right.
And
Yes.
they were like, yeah, that's what that was their stance, was like they were very politically active in ways that like I'd never seen before. And we were kind of part of that scene. but I think more we weren't so political, but we were definitely antagonistic and provocative in our stance. And we recognized music at the time as something more than just, like sounds or noises or songs. We like kind of were pushing for a movement, if you will.
Right. You were driven. Yes, because in that period, that early 80s, politically we had the Falkland War crisis, and then we had the miners' strike. There was this massive sort of anti-union, anti-left sort of thing. Then there was Greenham Common. We thought we were all going to be nuked at that point, so it was all quite depressing. But then we had the yuppie that started to appear, and that kind of, so it quickly went from the right to the left, and there was nothing in between. There was no liberals. There was just you had to stand one side or the other. So
Right.
yes, it was kind of a politically driven, and we all thought Thatcher would never last more than a year, but then she lasted the whole decade and sort of shaped the 80s quite strongly. But at the same time, it helped produce a lot of anger and great music. We had a
Mhm.
great soundtrack to that period. So with the band, did it sort of gel quite quickly and come together at that point in the early 80s?
I don't know. Gelling is kind of a tricky one. I mean, we definitely, I think I would say we prickled more than anything. We were kind of like, I think it was our stance to create something that was different. We didn't want to be anything similar to anything that was going on. And we knew the only way in which to sort of cause a splash was to be provocative and different. So I would say, yeah, in a way it gelled, but in a sort of like a subversive way. We were very intent on creating something that was weird and like would maybe hurt people's ears, so to speak. And we approached things really unconventionally. Like when we started the band, we would only play different songs every time we played, and we would play with a different singer every time we played. And it was very unconventional and weird and kind of like very art school, I guess. And I guess it took a long time for us to reach a place that was sort of more sellable or something, or
Right.
likable. Like we had a whole community of people who liked what we were doing, and we were really into what we were doing, but we didn't get to a place where we were actually creating songs with melodies. That took a while. That took a long time to
Yes,
get there.
and so when Courtney Love came into your radar or into your sort of community, how did that sort of had she been to Liverpool? Because she had this kind of did she have a summer in Liverpool staying with Julian Cope, or was that before or after your
Yeah, she
time?
had. It was before. She had been to Liverpool before. She came back to, I think she was in Liverpool, like definitely she had been there. She met Julian Cope. Maybe she like somehow was like hovering around Echo and the Bunnymen. That was
Oh,
sort of her.
that's right, because there's the
That
Liverpool
was her.
scene. Eric's
Yeah.
at Liverpool with all those people who were like Ian Brodie, who went on to the Lightning Seeds, and there was also the guy from the Wild Swans as well. Yeah, Paul. So she would have been. Did she seem quite worldly wise compared to everybody else that you knew at that stage?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, when I met her, she had just got back from Japan, which was so weird. It was like, what were you doing in Japan? I think she somehow stumbled on an opportunity to go and maybe strip in Japan. I really don't understand what she was doing there. I never really understood. But she had just gotten back from Japan. And when I met her, the night that I met her, she came to our show that we played in that club that you mentioned, Mabuhay Garden. The first night I met her, she showed up and she was wearing a wedding dress.
Right. She was
So
confident.
already that, yeah, very confident, very exotic, super sophisticated and really confident. Like who shows up at a punk rock venue in a wedding dress? It was just like bombastic and crazy. But right from the get-go, yeah, she kind of like she was an elevated sense of intellectualism in my eyes.
At that stage, did you dabble in any sort of esoteric kind of cosmicness? Because you mentioned that you're both Cancerians, and also you both share the same birthday. Were you going through the Ouija board and sort of tarot cards at this point? Because people
I
always love
mean,
that.
Yeah, yeah. My whole life, I think San Francisco is a lot about that. There's a lot of witchery, there's a lot of mysticism, there's a lot of tarot cards, there's a lot of, incense. And I think when we started the band, we were kind of like deeply rooted in sort of those flavors for sure. We also were really into there was a spoken word sort of collective called The Last Poets
Oh,
that were
yes.
really effective, and we really were into that, and we would wear like it was really inappropriate, but like thinking back on it now, we were just naive kids, and we didn't really like clock the fact that it was potentially like, you know s- not so cool. Like we were, taking elements of like a culture that wasn't ours and sort of putting it on in a way that was problematic. But at the same time, that's just, we didn't know any different. We grew dreadlocks, we all had dreadlocks. And we would wear dashikis, which were these African sort of like robes. And we would have incense and we would burn incense on the stage. And so, yeah, in terms of like San Francisco and what that city was and what that culture was, there was, we really fed into that. I
Yes.
think
Well,
also because it was like subversive and like obnoxious, and like at that time everyone was just making a very dark gothy sort of vibe, and we thought it was really like provocative to wear dashikis and like have incense and kind of like champion the hippie movement and laugh about it.
did you embrace the kind of North American Indian sweat lodges and smudging and because a bit later in the probably the early 90s I was in a bit of a hippie scene, and everyone wanted to get that spiritual sort of, they all wanted to be spiritually awakened somehow, so always going to India, and if that didn't work they'd go to the North American Indians, anything that could hopefully give them a bit of an elevated sort of personality, which probably failed, and eventually you had to give it up and just get on with life. But there was kind of exploring things at that. When you're younger, there's always this thing of this might make me more interesting. I might meet more beautiful people and have great friendships and have great sex and stuff like that. But in the
Yeah,
end,
great experiences, trying things, and like, yeah,
so
taking
with
risks.
Courtney as the lead singer then for a band, how long did that last? Was that much of a, was that a kind of serious period in the band, or were you just kind of all being quite fluid in life?
We were still at that point like switching singers a lot, and I would say Courtney was probably with us for about 6 months. We probably played, 10 shows together, and we were really serious about it. Yeah, she was fantastic. She was really a great performer. She's a really good poet and sang well, and yeah, it was one of the chapters of what we were doing. And yeah, it was in the early stages, but it was, yeah, fantastic. We
And
were
how were
still
you,
sowing our oats.
and with the 80s, how were you coping with the drug issues? Was it under control at that stage?
I think at that point I was smoking a lot of pot, really, and I didn't start doing heroin until like later. Once sort of grunge kind of kicked in and heroin became a chic sort of flavor of the times, that's when I got into it, I think. So I was a little late in the game. But San Francisco is a very heroin town. There's a lot of hard drugs there. But I didn't start doing that until I was probably in my 30s.
Yes. How did so it's always good to wait until you're a bit older. Did the
Mm.
MTV world sort of have much influence on you? Because I do, from this area, we didn't have cable and such exciting thing, but the video suddenly appeared, didn't it? And sort of the Michael Jackson video, and then you had hair metal, and then you had all these very sharp young men sort of dancing around on yachts and stuff like that. Did that sort of influence the musical direction of the band at all?
It did. I think more than anything, it was something that we thought was funny. It was definitely a backdrop to where we were and who we were in society. Like, girls just want to have fun, and like Madonna happened, and just everything sort of became kind of cartoon-like, and it presented a sort of a backdrop that I feel we could kind of like rebel against a little bit. But at the same time, we knew what was wrong about it and what was offensive about it, and we would embrace it and throw it back in people's faces. Like we would cover like funny songs, like a Van Halen song, just to fuck with people. So it kind of provided us a sense of a backdrop that was there that we weren't part of, but we exposed elements of just to fuck with people.
Yes, and obviously you mentioned the book because, I mean, I'd sort of also mentioned John Peel. He was just the go-to DJ, and his show was just brilliant. But he sort of brought in, there was punk, and then there was the post-punk period, indie rock, African reggae, but also early hip hop. And you mentioned Grandmaster Flash and the message being an amazing
Yeah, for sure.
influence. Did that was the hip hop world? Did that take you by surprise, or did you just embrace it all?
I think when that happened, it was really like, yeah, it was very surprising. Like, when hip hop first happened, that was the first time I ever heard it, I think, was like Grandmaster Flash and kind of heard like rapping. And yeah, it was so different. And then coupled with that, a sense of sort of electronic stuff. Um, yeah, it really turned the world around.
Yes. So you mentioned that was the moment you wrote the song "We Care a Lot." Do
Yeah,
you
for
remember?
sure.
Did that come in a moment's flash then to you?
I think it did. At the same time, there was I think Live Aid had just been on television, and there was a collective sort of via MTV. There was a sense of politicism and charity that was sort of like Bob Geldof. When that started, and like people like high celebrities were sort of getting on board and had a cause that hadn't really happened in our world so much. I mean, it was out there, but like with the sort of help of MTV, like suddenly it was really out there. Like Live Aid happened in London, and it was like this thing that we were all aware of just because of MTV. And there was a sincerity there in terms of, like saving the planet. But at the same time, it felt a little ridiculous and a little sort of kind of not propaganda, but it felt like we kind of doubted the sincerity of people who were involved. But at the same time, we felt it really hard. I felt sort of a sense of responsibility to the planet and to like us as a people. And it kind of comes off, I'm aware how cheekily it comes off, the phrase "we care a lot." But I think at the time we were ultimately very sincere about that sentiment.
Yes. Well, it was the anthem, wasn't it? That must have was that a bit of a wow? We've just hit gold quite early on our debut album. How did the band cope with that suddenly big airplay and sort of big attention?
It wasn't that big of an I mean, it might seem in retrospect like it was a big deal, but it really wasn't. It was sort of, I mean, it was a mild college kind of hit, and we got a couple. We were booking a tour around that time, and we were able to book a show in New York City based around that
Right.
song, which was kind of cool. But it definitely wasn't like we didn't make any money or we didn't reach any sort of fame success with that. But
Yes.
it was a taste of like, oh wow. To me more than anything, there was a cheekiness to the lyric, and I wrote those lyrics, and I was aware of the fact that like we were bringing a sense of humor into what we were doing. And not to say that we were a jokey band, but I mean, it was interesting to see like what a slogan like that would accomplish.
Yes, and it was, yeah. Did it become a bigger hit later on then? Because it just seemed to be around an awful long time.
It was around a long time because we put it out on one record, and then we got another record deal, and the record company that we signed with kind of like asked us to do it again because it kind of the first time we put it out was like on a really small label, and not that many people had heard it. So it was kind of cheesy, but what we did was we released it twice. We recorded it
Right.
twice.
Yes. And what was it like as the 80s progressed and sort of doing the follow-up album, Introduce Yourself? What was the sort of the vibe like of the band at that point?
Um, Well, our second record, we were still with our original singer, and things kind of started to fall apart a little bit. I think we started to recognize our limitations in terms of what we could do with the singer that we had. He was a great singer, and he's really bombastic and had a great personality, and he presented himself very well on stage and sort of catapulted us into this chaotic realm of a band that like was very unpredictable.
Yes.
And we kind of nailed that. But a band like that and who we were and what we were doing and the music that we were making, we definitely had limitations. And I think at that point we started to realize the limitations and then ended up firing that singer and hiring
Was
a
that
different one.
was Chuck, wasn't it?
That was Chuck, yeah.
Poor old Chuck. God, yes, it's a tough world, isn't it? Rock and roll. Did you feel like you had this sort of wherewithal to cope with the rocky path that you had chosen at that stage? Because some people don't, do they? Some people just can't quite navigate it, like Sid Vicious and people.
Yeah, I think Chuck, like, I don't, he didn't have the wherewithal, I think, to cope just in general. I don't think the band had a lot to do with what sort of like set him off, but he was kind of like, I mean, he was my best friend and I still love him and, would go to bat for him no matter what. But I think he just was a different kind of person. He was an alcoholic in a different way and kind of like always careening and always sort of like just on the brink of combustion.
Yes. And what was kind of suddenly coming out of America and touring Europe, which Elvis never did. I so just went to see the Baz Luhrmann film. So yes, Europe. What was
Oh,
that
I
like?
haven't seen it yet.
God, it's beautiful. It's just
That's what
glorious.
I hear. It's really gorgeous. Yeah.
It's just I love the biopic he did, Baz, 3 years, 4 years ago, and this was just it's just beautiful. It
I
literally
want to
just
see it. I can't wait.
yes. Do see it in a
Yeah,
big cinema.
English.
Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah.
Did Europe embrace you with the great enthusiasm that we do?
Slowly but surely, yeah, we got a lot more attention in England and Europe than we ever had in America. And I don't know, it just took off in a way there that it hadn't. And it was a kind of a weird disparity between like going there and then going back to America and trying to do tours where we weren't very popular. And it kind of more than anything sort of dangled the carrot in terms of like, oh, we do have something that people want to see, but it took America a while to get on
Yes.
board with it.
Because in the book, you mention the crew of kids who you met in London who sort of follow you around. Was this the first time that had happened that you'd had a
For
group?
sure, yeah. But that doesn't happen in America. That's not a thing that American kids do. I mean, maybe with the Grateful Dead, I think that happened. Like people followed around like tours and would go to different shows and follow people. But generally, it's not something that American kids do. In England, though, for sure, that happened right away. Kids would kind of show up, and we got to know kids who would go on the entire tour. And they would hitchhike and bring their kits and sort of like travel from show to show. And we'd give them like all the stuff that was in our riders and sometimes let them stay in our hotel rooms and stuff and put them on our guest lists. And still, I'm still friends with
That
those
is a beautiful
kids.
story. But at the same time, Chuck was not coping with life, was he, at this point?
He was coping fine. He was just drinking a lot. And at one point, we just sort of had to, like, yeah, put the kibosh on that because it just wasn't working in terms of like presentation of a show. Like, he was just drunk a lot.
Yes, because you say there's a line in this your book. Change is lonely, progress is tedious, steps are small. That was quite poetic.
Oh,
The streets in
thanks.
San Francisco winter are slick and slippery. I like that. That was a nice bit. Was it kind of,
Thank you.
were you at a kind of an emotional crossroads at this point with the band on the second album, Problems with Chuck, and dealing
It
with
was
the,
difficult for me because I think I was closest to Chuck, and we decided as a band to let him go, and it felt kind of shitty to do. So, yeah, in terms of just like what we did, it felt, yeah, that felt. It was hard for me to do, to let go of Chuck in that way, yeah.
yes, I would want
And
these
then there
things.
was some guilt in terms of, like, we went on to the next singer, and the next singer was, like, a white kid, and he was, like, really pretty and could sing really well, and we had such success after that, so there was a certain amount of guilt in terms of, like, we had fired, Chuck, our original singer, and
Yes.
moved on. So, yeah, there was some guilt that I felt, I think.
And did that all work a lot easier? What was the dynamic like suddenly having such a sort of key component to the band?
It worked well, I think. It was a sort of like, in a situation like that, like in a family or in a friend group, bringing in a new person is really, I mean, that notion, a breath of fresh air and something, a new ingredient really changed everything. It did give us a sense of hope and optimism. And then just sort of the brass tacks of that particular person, Mike Patton, is he could sing so well. He's such an amazing singer. And having that as a sort of a toolkit to sort of like attack songs with was really different. We'd never had that before. So we could get away with and accomplish a lot more than we did with Chuck.
Yes, the timing is quite interesting, isn't it? Because for me, the 80s is broken into different bits. There was because I was a massive Smiths fan, and between 83
Hmm.
to 87, there was the real world of indie pop, and they split up. And then Ecstasy comes along, and there's this sort of a bit of a different vibe, a bit of a dance
Sure.
scene. There was the Detroit sound. There was the ambient world of the Orb and 808 State, and a guy called Gerald. Then 4AD was bringing out the Throne Muses, the Pixies. Then Sub Pop brought out Bleach, didn't they? And there was that sort of yes, there was the sort of the early years of grunge. What was it like for you then, sort of turning into the late 80s with your third album with a new singer and then sort of a bigger budget and a new label?
Yeah, all of those things came into play. It was a really odd time. And plus, it was sort of going back and forth between England and America or Europe and America. Like all of those bands were sort of coming up, like Stone Roses suddenly, and like Happy Mondays, and like druggy, like Manchester culture and that sort of vibe. But then coming back to like America, which was sort of a little bit more, deadbeat, like not as interesting. But then like we had stuff like, yeah, you're right. Like you're saying, like the Pixies happening and like when grunge started happening, there were a lot of different flavors happening. And it was a really unique time, I think, in our culture, in that, like, even like traveling around, like, we would end up doing, festival shows in Europe and England. Particularly back then, there was such a healthy, vibrant mix of things. You would see, like, really honestly, like Sinead O'Connor and, like, yeah, like, you know, uh, The Prodigy, and like just so many different flavors clashing. And it felt really healthy and exciting at the time.
Yes,
And it
there
was
was.
sort of that. It was more than anything, there were so many different things, and I think they were coming from, a lot of different places, but, like, there was a lot of diversity that was allowed. I think now we tend to just, like, I mean, I've been on festivals since, and they tend to be a lot more sort of homogenized or, like, specific in terms of, like, hard rock festival or
Yes,
dance, dance, dance festival or, like, a goth festival.
goth,
Whereas
yes.
before, it just felt like everything was all mixed in, and it was just like it felt so healthy.
Yes, this is true, actually. Yeah, well, you mentioned Galaxy 500 in your
Oh,
book as
yeah.
well, because they sort of
Mhm.
because you'd been introduced to them, and I remember seeing them at the Norwich Arts Centre and playing their sort of, and they were very big on the John Peel show, which was quite exciting. But yeah, there was
I
also
love
that there
that
was a bit of a
band.
shoegazy scene in the UK because we had
Sure.
Carter, but we also had My Bloody Valentine and Slow Dive and
Right.
the Faith Healers and Silverfish. There was a lot of that, and that sort of morphed into another world, which eventually became, I suppose, early years of Britpop. But then there was also a festy scene with bands like the Levelers and that little bit of a crusty, there was a lot of people going to more festivals. There was people with didgeridoos suddenly appearing in bands. It was very
Yeah.
confusing.
And then theatrical too, like Super Furry Animals or stuff like that, like
Yes. So when Kurt Cobain suddenly appeared, did you suddenly go, "Oh, Courtney? We used to be in a band together." Did what was it like
No,
meeting?
I was still friends with Courtney. We were still really tight. And like, I saw her all the time. And I knew that she was going to I knew when they had started seeing each other. And I met Kurt specifically through Courtney. Yeah.
Yes. And did
It wasn't
you
like I saw him somewhere and like that, oh, you know Courtney. Like I'd met him through Courtney.
right? How was your drug taking in the late 80s? Was that under control or was it getting a bit?
It was getting very sort of like I was a drug addict by that time. By the time of grunge, I think I was doing heroin on a regular basis and having a problem with it.
Yes, God. Were you kind of aware that was a bad move as Lemmy? Because Lemmy used to say a few things. He said he hated heroin, didn't he? because
I don't know anything about Lemmy. He didn't
he
like heroin. I know he was like a meth person, maybe. Yeah.
speed.
You're right.
That is myth. Yeah, because he had at a very quite a early age. His girlfriend died in the tub of heroin, and he just hated it.
Ooh.
And I think that was the love of his life. But he was very young and traumatized by the experience. So, yeah, there you go. So when you released The Real Thing, was there a good feeling in the band at this stage?
I think it was very optimistic. You know, that was our first foray into like a new sort of like sense of making music with a different singer. So yeah, it was definitely there was hope and optimism, and like we were like I was saying before, we were able to make these songs that we could suddenly achieve in a different way that felt more proficient and more believable and kind of more commercial. So it was like we put out that record and it took a really long time for it to sort of take off, but when we did, it was like, yeah, it was a new beginning for sure.
Yes, that was quite interesting because you at that point even been on Top of the Pops and met Radiohead, which was very exciting, wasn't it?
For sure, right. Yes.
Yes. Were you sort of being pushed into that world like we've got a scene and you could be part of it, like the grunge, that kind of the boys from America. You could sort of be marketed in a certain way.
I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, we were so different. We were always so different. Like it always felt like we were always kind of had to make our own mark because we were so different than the rest of those bands.
Yes. Because you then mention this tour with Guns N' Roses and Metallica, which sounds quite was it good? Was it bad? It sounds quite hard work.
It was hard work, but it really wasn't. I mean, we weren't really wanted on that tour. Like, it was nice that when it was flattering that these bands wanted us to tour with them, but at the same time, like, nothing ever came of it that was any good. Like, people were not really into what we were doing. The audience that went to go see Metallica and Guns N' Roses, they did not have anything to do with Faith No More. We were like not interesting to them.
Right, God. Was it and what was it like being on such a sort of tour with such must have been a massive budget with such a lot of drama? Because you mentioned, oh yes, that's it. You mentioned Axel and his kind of often pulling shows and his ability to want lots of different spiritual healers or spiritual guides to sort of cleanse the stage and cleanse the aura.
Yeah, it was a much different sort of like it was definitely a much different camp. There was a lot of money involved. I mean, those two bands were like the biggest bands. A tour like that had never happened before, so it was a real new beginning and a sort of a window into like a sense of indulgence and a sense of like success that we'd never seen before.
Yes. But then at that stage, because a little bit later you buy a house. So are you feeling more financially flush at this point?
Not so much. I mean, it takes a long time to sort of like come to terms with like, oh, I'm doing okay. But at that point, I think we were on tour for so long and we were working so hard. It didn't really dawn on us until later that we were even good in terms of like making money and stuff, you know?
Yes. So then the 90s, you play Reading, don't you? This is a sort of a big moment. Was that the first festival you played in the UK?
No, I think we played festivals before. We'd always been in, I think Reading was probably the first time we headlined a festival. But I mean, we played festivals a long time. We always counted on festivals for sort of like making us some money in terms of like that was a paycheck always that was like surprising to us. Like all of a sudden there was money that to be made, like even playing like lower down on a festival. But we had played a lot of festivals.
Yes, because this is where your book kind of takes a bit more of a personal turn. Because is your
Yeah.
father ill at this stage, and is
Yeah, he just started to get ill at that stage. Hey, David, how long do you want to go for the interview?
oh well, I was just going to say, do you have any more like 15 minutes?
We could go 10. I'm a little bit at the end of my attention span. Is that
Yes.
okay?
Okay. Look, just
I
kind
have
of
prepared for like usually I do like 45 is like the
yes.
tops,
God,
but
let's okay. Just to sort of to wrap up your sort of the band then. So how does it
sure,
then?
sure.
So then you do Angel Dust, don't you? That's the next one.
Yeah, we did that record for sure, and that was sort of like was a different vibe for us.
Bad?
Not bad. I think with the success of the real thing, we kind of realized that we needed to go in a different direction and we needed to challenge ourselves. And I think we were a little bit resentful about the attention that we got for sort of being regarded in a sort of pop sort of way. And I think we just at that point really like set out to dispel any sort of notion that we were any kind of like commercially viable band, and we really just wanted to fuck things up and just kind of be adventurous and experimental and challenge people and ourselves.
Yes. My God. And how did you cope with the 90s? Because obviously it finishes with Woodstock 99, which is quite a bad end to any decade, isn't it?
Yeah,
Did your 90s, how did you sort of navigate that commercial sort of sound that started to happen with people like Limp Bizkit and I don't know, the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Marilyn
right.
Manson and your own musical sort of journey?
I think it taught us to sort of like lean into what we were doing and sort of just like pay attention to ourselves more than anything. I think there was a notion to sort of, we weren't like a real band that people like embraced in terms of like as a part of a scene. We were never any part of any scene. Like Lollapalooza was a big festival in America, and we definitely like never got invited to do that. I think we just sort of had to do what we did and stick to ourselves and stick to sort of our sort of direction of where we went with our music, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. When you came to record, what's the album of the year, which was the sixth studio? This was the last one you played on before the band you finished with it. Did you feel that
Right.
that was kind of going to be the last album that you were going to do with the band at that point?
It's hard to say because at that point I was playing with my other band, Imperial Teen, and that just made a lot more sense to me. I was kind of newly sober and not doing drugs anymore, and it just wasn't like Faith No More wasn't something that I was paying a lot of attention to at that time, and I just kind of needed to move on a little bit. So there was definitely that was in the air for me. I knew that I wanted to do my other band more than I wanted to do Faith No More. So,
Right. So that was Imperial Teen, which was quite
hmm
yes. Well, that's an interesting. So just on the book, because it's obviously you wrote this book and it's just come out. I mean, the last couple of chapters are so emotional with how you dealing with your father and his jumper. Did the pro? When did you decide to write this your memoir at this point?
it kind of came up. I just started like I've always considered myself a writer, but I just never really committed anything to the page. But around the time of COVID, I think I just started writing on a regular basis. And it took a while before I sort of came to terms with the fact that it was going to be a book. But I really enjoy the process of developing a voice and a tone and a narrative. And that was really important to me for whatever reason. In the course of COVID, it was just a time for sort of like stretching and finding yourself, or it was for me anyway. And writing the book kind of helped me do that, I think.
Yes. Did it help you process much of your life with your teen period, your family, your sisters? Because it's an amazing thing to enter the world of rock and roll. Most people want to enter it and don't, but when you do, nothing prepares you for that journey and the sort of the chaotic experience it gives you.
Yeah, I mean, cataloging it and writing it all down and seeing your life in a narrative, sort of linear way, that was really rewarding for whatever reason. I was able to sort of see connections in my life and see a sense of a cause and effect, or like places that I went, or coincidences that even happened, or sort of kind of like mystical sort of things or connections that I hadn't seen before. There's a real reward, I think, to writing, for me anyway.
Yes, I know. It's kind of beautiful. So the last chapter, 38, where you have the fog in the village grew denser and thicker till no one could see a thing. So with this, it's kind of a lot to do with your kind of your dad's jumper, isn't it? And the handle of a door. Could you just
Mhm.
explain a little bit more about that particular last chapter?
I think I'm dealing with in terms of just like the nostalgia of a city that was, and as it dissipates and as it becomes less of a place and loses its magic, sort of like my mind started to go to like tangible things like my father's sweater and like the handle of a door and like just really specific like physical things. um I don't know, for some reason it makes sense to me, but it's a hard thing to even like put my head around or talk sense out of. I just know like the feeling was like it was sort of not a changing of a guard so much as a new stance in my life and a sort of a new direction and a sort of a realization and a moving on, I guess. I don't know, it's a really intense thing when your parents die, it's just like all of a sudden having that sort of like loneliness and that gone in your life kind of, for me, it changed everything. And I was trying to sort of get to the heart of that. Also, I mean, there was a lot of loss that happened at once for me. It was a loss of youth, it was a loss of my parents, it was a loss of friends, and a loss of innocence, I think, in a way.
Yes, I always remember Robert Plant used that phrase when John Bonham had died and the band broke. He said, I couldn't. Yeah, the loss of innocence. It was over. You just can't
Hmm.
be that person that you were when something drastic happens, and then you. But did you find the writing a really important process to sort of deal with a lot of your feelings and try and make some sort of sense by writing?
I did for sure. Like I recognize it now, but at the time, are my earphones still working? I think they
Yes, they're
just
still
died.
there.
Okay. Um, at the time, I didn't realize it, but after everything was said and done, and the book was finished, then I kind of realized, like, oh, looking back on it and looking what I had done, I realized, like, oh, yeah, this has changed everything.
Amazing. Well, look, I won't sort of keep dragging you through, but yeah, look, thank you ever so much for this time, and yeah,
Yeah,
so
you're
when
welcome. Thank you for talking, David.
and that was me in conversation with Roddy, talking about his new book, which is titled The Royal Weave Jawbone Press Books. This has been the C86 show. David Eastaugh. Have a great week. Stay safe.